Test. Well, hello. So really my testimony is not about me. The only reason I'm up here in front of any of you this morning is because of God. That's the truth of it. And so that's what I'm essentially here to tell you about, how God did that in my life. So the first way that I would say that God really saved me was through his sovereign grace. In other words, it was only him. It wasn't me. There's nothing in me that naturally went towards him. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. One of the examples of sovereign grace really is that when I was 3 years old, that's when I actually accepted Jesus. I remember I asked my mother, Mom, does everyone go to heaven? And she was like, no, well, you first have to be saved. And I said, well, how do you do that? And she was like, well, you have to accept Jesus into your heart. And I was like, well, can I do it? And she was like, sure. And so then I just got down to the side of my bed and repeated after her. And I know that I experienced Jesus in that moment. But then throughout my whole life, I went to a church that essentially was all about morality, like you were saying. And because of that, I really couldn't obey God, or I couldn't love him, Because it's not just the teachings alone that will get you to love God, but it's the presence of God that changes your heart, right? And so I remember in grade 5 trying to get out of sin and trying to have a relationship with God, and not being able to do it, being really confused, and being like, all right, whatever, I don't know what that is. But it was almost like throughout my whole life, from 3 till 19, my whole life, even though I was living in active rebellion against him, it was almost like he was whispering to me the whole time, saying like, one day you're going to love me, and you don't even know it yet, And I remember hearing a story at a basketball camp, youth ministry, when I was 10 years old, and the youth pastor said something like, was telling a story about how a man who chose, almost like Jonah, chose to run away from God, and chose to not live in God's will. And essentially what he described is that this man got to the end of that road and was in such a dark place, and then realized it was because he hadn't followed God's will, and that terrified me. As a 10-year-old, it just really stuck in my heart, and I thought, like, wow, I really need to make sure I follow God's will, sort of thing. So then, in life, seeking fulfillment, from 13 to 16, I tried to find the fullness of life in popularity. From 16 to 17, I tried to find it in romantic love. And from 17 to 19, I tried to find it in wisdom. So all this time, I'm really just worshiping all these other things, and essentially, in some sense, looking for fulfillment, but unable to find lasting fulfillment. Right? But I remember I came out of high school, and I was planning to go to a university called St. Stephen's, which is a Christian university, and amazing travel program, But then I remember just having this really big fear, and just saying, God, please don't let me go on the wrong path. Please don't let me go on the wrong path. I was really desperate that he would not let me go on the wrong path. And within that month, some reason, I decided I wanted to become a music producer, right? And I followed that passion because I knew I prayed that prayer, and I was like, you know what? This is what I'm feeling in my heart right now, that I should go and pursue. I should go and pursue music. And so, I just Googled audio engineering schools, what I Googled. And the first one that came up, it was Harborside Institute of Technology, and that's a school in North Vancouver. So in a matter of 6 months, I was over in North Vancouver. And the house I moved into happened to be just down the street from a church. And so one day I walked into that church, and the glory of God in that place literally transformed me in like a matter of seconds. And so the second way that God saved me was through the worship of His church. And so that's why I think what happens here in this place is actually one of the most important things that happens on the face of the earth. And we need to treat it as such. And because I walked into that place, and it was almost like sin couldn't dwell in that place. I mean, it was like you're walking into God. It was terrifying. And I was frightened. And, I was filled with joy. And I was broken. And I was automatically, I was just in love. Immediately in love. And I think that you have to, in order to obey God, you can't just know the truths of what He wants you to do, because you're not going to naturally want to do it. You have to actually know God Himself. You have to actually meet God Himself to want to obey Him, because it's not until you see how beautiful He is that you love Him. Because what I experienced when I walked into that room was, I can't really describe it perfectly, but just almost like an infinite delight. It was like He had so much joy, so much delight in that people, right? And they had so much delight in Him. That I was literally like, this is the best thing I have ever discovered. And He just transformed my entire life in a matter of minutes. So it's incredible. So I guess the last thing I would want to say is that in this place, when we're worshiping, just to seek God with all our hearts, and just to really, as one people, try to worship Him as one body with all the joy and all the love that we can, because there's so much more to God than we realize, I think. I think that we oftentimes limit Him, and because we don't expect a lot of Him. But I would say this: the more that you pursue God, the more that you'll find.